My name is Ramona Masacci. I'm an artist, a creator. I learned about modern monetary theory through Bernie Sanders' campaign. I wanted to understand his economic platform, which led me to his economic advisor, Stephanie Kelton. I started reading her work, and it intrinsically resonated with me. So I wanted everyone else to learn about it. I got together with my friends at Real Progressives, and we put together this book club. For 9 weeks, we read and discussed Stephanie Kelton's bestseller, The Deficit Myth. We started each session with passages from that week's chapter. Then a guest took questions from the attendees. You're about to watch the recording of the Q&A section. Hello, welcome everyone. Our guest today is Nathan Tankus. He is a research director of Modern Money Network and a research scholar at the Global Institute for Sustainability Prosperity. He has written for the Financial Times, American Prospect, Business Insider, Naked Capitalism, The Appeal, and JSTOR Daily, and currently has a blog, Notes on the Crisis, at nathantankus.substack.com. Welcome, Nathan. So our first question is from Roseanne. Roseanne, would you like to ask your question?
Nathan, I was thinking about what do you do in particular, just on a daily basis, with regular citizens, regular voters, to introduce them to the framework of MMT? Because I'm doing that like every day, trying to always get the right words, the right message, so that it clicks in people's heads. What do you do, Nathan?
Well, I mean, primarily a lot of my time right now has been writing. I mean, there's a lot going on in our world. You know, obviously, the Presley job guarantee resolution just dropped, and that's been an ongoing process. We're still working on accompanying legislation to the resolution, So there's kind of a lot of MMN is kind of at the point where there's like a lot of these kind of background things that are going on that we have to focus on, and in the process of that we meet with union locals and such in terms of having these kind of conversations, and even though the people you were talking to have some degree of influence, my experience is that the conversations in terms of explaining MMT are obviously they have unique concerns, unique knowledge about their specific situation in terms of how the local runs and so on and so forth. But for the most part, the MMT spiel is in my experience pretty similar across the board. That people feel off balance and like they're starting from scratch, whether you're talking to often a congressional staffer or a journalist or people in a union local, or people in like a local community nonprofit or a tenant group. But yeah, a lot of my time has been focused on writing just now, and obviously, it's more complicated interacting with people in the way that I might in different circumstances with the pandemic and everything. A lot of what our kind of normal pattern of interacting with people, just like with everyone, has been disrupted. At the same time, we have a lot of these kind of ongoing projects that have been going on. So, in terms of public events where quote unquote anyone can show up, or like anyone can show up on the Zoom call, for me at least, that's taken a back seat for a while, for the last like 6 or 8 months or so, with everything going on.
Patrick has a question. Patrick, would you like to ask?
Yeah, hi Nathan. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. So my question is that, from the MMT perspective, the big issue, that we talk about a lot is inflation. And at the same time, in terms of policy prescriptions, the big one, that everybody has kind of gathered around seems to be the job guarantee. And I love the idea. I think it's a fantastic idea. But the thing that occurs to me is that the job guarantee as a policy item sounds kind of particularly inflationary. Because not only do you have that initial, pretty much enormous outlay of money, but it also seems like it would affect the price of labor, that would go up, with that kind of competition and stuff. So I was wondering if you could kind of address that. Why is that become kind of the MMT thing, and what can we say about that?
So I would say that there's a kind of one-off effect when a job guarantee is introduced, and that the one-off effect, just like there's a one-off spending effect, the one-off effect on the price of labor is the same. If you think about that minimum standard idea, that the job guarantee is this public option for employment, setting a minimum standard for employment. Well, obviously, there's a lot of employers out there that won't meet that minimum standard initially, and the job guarantee is competition at that minimum standard. But it's not competition with any job. It's not like, a job paying double the job guarantee wage, for example, that, the job guarantee is, uniquely competitive against. So that minimum standard setting, that's definitely an ongoing process where the economy is going to be adjusting to that minimum standard. But it's not an ongoing effect on the cost of labor, where the cost of labor is accelerating. Remember, the worrying about, gigantic price increases, you're worrying about the price increases happening constantly, year after year after year. You're not worrying about a one-time effect. And even, a high minimum wage that the job guarantee is enforcing, that's a level effect. You only get to your $15 minimum wage once. It's an adjustment process to that. Obviously you will adjust it up each year, but the point being is that, for most of that time period, you just have this kind of new wage standard. In terms of the broader significance, yes, you do have that initial big boost in spending, but you now have a much stronger fiscal system, in the sense that, the job guarantee has been added as an automatic fiscal stabilizer. This policy that spends more or taxes less in recessions and spends less and taxes more in booms has been added to our other automatic stabilizers, our other kind of automatic taxes, automatic unemployment benefits that adjust. And, actually, given, how many programs are devoted to social supports, things like the Earned Income Tax Credit, in terms of the overall amount that the government would be spending when you implemented a job guarantee, along with raising the minimum wage to $15, there's all of these kind of immediate offsetting expenditures. So the net amount of increase that the government is spending is probably smaller than it might seem initially. And then you now have your minimum standard of labor, and you now have, a set of fiscal policies that will respond even more strongly to a boom in the economy. This will drain spending. You now have, what they say, the buffered, the employed buffer stock of labor. You've got this employed pool of labor that's now available for the private sector to hire if, there's an uptick in private demand. While the job guarantee, and keep in mind that often, historically, dealing with employment meant spending a ton of money. I mean, even right now, we're talking, we're kind of almost back in that moment. We're talking about spending a lot of money just now to get the economy going, and it's correct. It's the right thing to do right now. But there's a lot of slips from the cup from your big, spending programs to actually employing people. The job guarantee targets employing people directly. We don't have to worry about this full employment of labor issue anymore with our minimum standard. And so we don't need to go on these kind of big, pump priming spending programs to boost employment because we already have full employment. So, relative, is a job guarantee gonna be deflationary compared to, an austerity economy where, the government spends little to nothing? It's some kind of more complicated question, but, often the context of the job guarantee kind of being superior from a price or inflation point of view is really about comparing it to the alternative of these kind of big spending programs that are less targeted to the employing people rather instead of just directly employing people when that's your goal.
Aaliyah has a question.
Hi there, Nathan. Thank you for being here. So in reading the book on page 230, Stephanie Kelton quotes a 2010 CBO report. And in that report, it says that higher debt would increase the probability of a fiscal crisis in which investors would lose confidence in the government's ability to manage its budget. And then the government would be forced to pay more to borrow money. So I'm going to ignore the borrowing money aspect because I think we're beyond that in this book now. But I'm curious about what basis is there for anyone to lose confidence in our government's ability when it's always been large spending and deficits that have gotten us out of crises?
I think, the basic issue here is that confidence is a very vague notion. There's a reason why, people love to invoke business confidence and say, oh, well, that's going to really hurt business confidence because it doesn't concretely mean anything. And it doesn't necessarily, have negative effect. It really, really you're just talking about ultimately someone somewhere's mood. Oh, I didn't like that. Well, what are you going to concretely do? And so it's easy to say, well, some rich guy somewhere isn't going to like it that the government is spending a lot of money, and to invoke their, the idea of their confidence in the government when you really just mean they don't like it, and then invoke, that they're going to make you pay consequences for doing something that they don't like. So, I think that, one part of the question, obviously can give just the MMT answer of, the government sets interest rates, and, if someone tries to sell off a bunch of government bonds and tries to force interest rates higher, that's going to run straight into the government's interest rate policy, as now implemented by the Federal Reserve, could be implemented by someone else. But really, what I think more your question is getting at is that there's this vague idea of confidence that's very easy to invoke because what's confidence? It's very. I can't disprove that some financier somewhere is seeing a government bond auction going, well, I'm losing confidence in the government. It's a kind of vague, non-observable notion that's, easy to scare people with.
Ganesh has a question. Hi, Ganesh. Go ahead.
Hey, Nathan. So when we talk about MMT and government spending, the area that we are struggling most with is in local, state and local austerity is kind of where all the spending needs to happen and doesn't. So my question was that the Federal Reserve Municipal Liquidity Facility was completely hampered by rules put in place by Secretary Mnuchin. With Janet Yellen, can we expect to see this be more accessible to states and municipalities to have access to desperately needed funds?
I don't think so. Officially, the facilities were closed for new activity. at the end of the year. And as far as I've seen, admittedly, I haven't checked the last week or so, but as far as I've seen, Yellen has no intention of continuing with that and reactivating the program. I wrote about this on my notes in the crises. And from in her confirmation hearing, she didn't signal at all that she was looking to re-invoke the program. I think right now people are not really taking the issue of state and local government very seriously because many governments didn't pursue shutdowns like they were expected to try to prevent death because of coronavirus. Their tax revenues have actually come in better than expected, because they've gotten their economy going again, at the cost of many thousands of lives, but nonetheless. And so actually, the latest conversation today is actually from Democratic senators pushing to cut state and local government aid out of the Biden's $1.9 trillion package and put that money to infrastructure, since state and local governments, quote unquote, don't really need it. So in the context where Congress is actively, talking down the amount of government of state and local aid that it's going to give, I think it's not very likely that Yellen will have the confidence to make use of another state and local government aid program. The Federal Reserve won't, with Yellen's pushing.
That's highly unfortunate. Gil has a question. His question is, why is a federal job guarantee a far superior policy prescription than a UBI, in your opinion?
I would say, so first I would say that, often, obviously, and there's conversations that I've participated in where these are kind of pitted one-on-one against each other. But I do want to emphasize that they cover some similar purposes, but not all. So, for example, when people argue for a UBI because of unemployment or because of low wages and wanting to set a higher standard than the labor market, obviously that is a purpose that the job guarantee is aimed at. And I think the job guarantee is superior at doing that because, it's directly hiring people and it's directly setting a minimum standard in the labor market rather than kind of trying to provide workers individually a bargaining position in which they can individually bargain with their employer for better conditions rather than having a government program as this outside option that they can collectively reach. But obviously that's not all the purposes that people put UBI to. One of the attractions of UBI is it seems like for its staunchest supporters, seems like it can solve many different problems all at once. And so in fairness to UBI advocates, there are things like support to the disabled who absolutely can't work, rather than people who are simply disabled by capitalism and put into disabling positions by capitalism and socially constructed as unable to work, which is a part of development of capitalism over the last century or so. There are nonetheless people who need that support who the job guarantee isn't the right fit for, and so there are these other programs that would need to provide direct income supports that the job guarantee would absolutely have to be a supplement to. It's not a one-size-fits-all policy. It's solving this particular problem of inadequate standards in the labor market and involuntary unemployment.
Is it possible to have a combination of both? Like, so people who are on disability get their UBI, and then people also have their federal jobs guarantee, but in addition, everyone has a UBI. Is that possible to have both?
I mean, I think, obviously there are proponents of let's just do both. That's not how I would approach that situation. On the other hand, I've been a staunch advocate of emergency direct cash payments, in this crisis. So it's, being against a UBI or not thinking that that's the best way to go doesn't mean, doesn't mean that I would be the deciding vote against if there was, if I was the deciding vote somehow in Congress, or that, or that we don't need some kind of other program. It's not personally the route I would go. I think there are issues with trying to advocate both at once. The other thing to say, of course, is there are all sorts of kind of basic income programs, quote unquote, that you can propose that aren't universal programs, but aren't harsh means tested programs that aren't means tested at all. In fact, that are targeting to these issues more directly. But that's obviously kind of larger, more complicated question than I can really get into in terms of talking about the deficit myth.
Okay, Iker has a question. Hi, Iker. You can ask your question. You can unmute now.
Yeah, hi. Thanks.
Hello.
So my question is basically just, it seems that in terms for job, it seems like the $15 an hour seems low for the job guarantee. Is there a reason why this number was chosen, or specifically just focused on $15? Because it seems like you hear talk about being already way past the inflation and kind of keep the wages competitive. So why are we fighting so much for $15 when it seems already so low?
I mean, I think the $15 an hour is just what's out there right now. I mean, they're getting it like hell, getting just a $15 minimum wage increase through right now. I would say in the legislation that we're working on, we're looking at a more aggressive timetable than the Raise the Wage Act, and also tying, at minimum, the minimum wage to the median wage, so that it'd be indexed. The problem with a lot of the current proposals is that it's not just that you're getting to $15 an hour, but you're getting to $15 an hour in 5 years, and then it's finally indexed to some broader measure of the labor market. In the proposal we're working on a kind of more aggressive proposal, but it's right now it's just a very difficult move to make. The other thing I would say is that I support very aggressive increases in the minimum wage every year. I think not just should we have big jumps now, but basically it should be growing at like 5-10% every year, even if once it hits some kind of benchmark number that we think is good, whether that's 15 or 20 or 22 or whatever. But the complication is that there's complicated effects that are happening in the economy with big minimum wage increases and with a job guarantee. And if, there is, adjustment pains to, say, jumping from, $7.25 to $20 within 1 year, you don't want to kill the job guarantee with those adjustment pains. Like, the reality is like, every year where they don't raise the minimum wage is a year that they've won a little bit more, because it's just going to be, even, sympathetic policymakers are very scared of the idea of tripling the minimum wage all in sort of a 1 year jump. And it's very hard to get them to move them that. And they already feel like they're taking such a tremendous risk defending an idea like a job guarantee. And, ultimately, I think that's, in a lot of ways, I think that's unfortunate. But on the other hand, it doesn't do us any good to try to push something through that's that can have these backlash effects and then have it removed altogether. Like the worst thing you want to do is raise the minimum wage to something, and then there's some like transitory negative effects that convinces Congress to lower it again. So that's what I would say. But as I said, what we're working on in terms of Presley's proposal is more aggressive than the Raise the Wage Act, which is part of all the discussions right now.
I have a question. So let's say you have a small business, right? And hypothetically, we raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour. Some miracle happens. And so that small business is not able to pay whatever their 2 employees that they have, $50 an hour to keep those employees. But they need the employees to keep the business going, but it's a small family business. Would it be possible for the federal government to be able to supplement some of that income?
It can. I mean, I would say that, I'll put it this way. I think that if you're going to do a 1-year jump where you triple the minimum wage, realistically, that would probably have to come with some sort of program, some sort of temporary kind of emergency or transitory basic income for small businesses to deal with the adjustment process, because it's just, there's going to be a lot of businesses that are just not going to be able to deal with the tripling overnight, especially, dealing with the aftermath of COVID and everything. That would probably have to be the case if you have to be very aggressive. In terms of the long-term program, I can be sympathetic to people in individual situations, but I think the reality, and I think that, there are other policies that, I think should be implemented to help small businesses, negotiate with larger businesses and kind of collectively negotiate and such. But like at the end of the day, you need to be able to pay a living wage to your employees, and it doesn't do any good socially for us to be subsidizing for-profit businesses by keeping wages low. And I don't think permanent subsidies to businesses so that because they can't afford to operate at living wages necessarily makes sense. But obviously, that gets into a whole conversation about minimum wage politics, which is a little bit behind the kennel here as well.
Okay. Hi, Jabari. Jabari has a question.
Hi, Jabari.
How you doing, Nathan?
Doing all right.
All right. So my question is, how important do you think universal basic services will be in creating an economy for all people?
Yeah. So I think it's a good slogan. I think it riffs off of UBI. The way I kind of personally think about this is just that we need to have a care economy where we are providing things that are free at the point of service to people so that they can live their lives, whether it's universal housing, whether it's, my personal view, directly handing out food and handing out hot meals, directly supplying food to people at no cost. All the way down the line, basically all the basic necessities of life. I think you should be able to get something free at the point of service. But yeah, more generally, I think getting people to live a kind of low carbon lifestyle that nonetheless is a very high standard of living is going to involve a lot of these collective goods where people feel very enriched, not just these things, but also, going free arts, free theater performances, free music. Like, you need to create a society full of these free collective goods that are free at the point of service, in order to kind of build an enriching society where people feel like they don't need to accumulate a whole bunch of wealth to live a good life.
Amen. Raul has a question. Hi, Raul.
Hi, Ramona. Hi, Nathan. Thank you for coming in. Fairly short question, but may lead to something in the discussion. How long will it take to elect the U.S.'s first legitimate MMT politician?
I mean, it's all about definitions. I think, I think there are a lot of people who are going to be, leaning on MMT and leaning on MMT expertise more and more. I think we've made a lot of advances, especially in the last 12 months or so. The silver lining of coronavirus has really kind of been even more the mainstreaming of MMT expertise in a lot of different, but as we obviously think, are connected conversations. On the other hand, I'm sure any of you can think of quotes from whether it's Rashida Tlaib, obviously AOC, Ayanna Pressley, and so forth, that are inconsistent. I will say that there's another congressperson that I haven't actually mentioned in the list that I just rattled off, who's working on an MMT resolution right now with us. And I think that may be a watershed in terms of some statement of principles of like what it would mean to be following what MMT says, and what it would mean to not be following it, and that to be part of the congressional record, to complement the anti-MMT resolutions. So I think obviously you can debate that. I think I wouldn't bemoan or necessarily disagree with anyone who felt that it's not going to be a true MMT politician until it's someone who comes up from the ranks, someone who is not just willing to go along or willing to listen to MMT experts, but kind of speaks like they truly get it inside themselves. And I think that's there is some truth to that, because no matter how sympathetic a congressperson is, MMT is kind of a different way, a lens of seeing the world. And as a congressperson, you're especially a left-wing one, you're a truly left-wing one, you're very busy and very stressed out, and it's very difficult to devote yourself to entering any specific worldview that takes time, effort, investment that isn't related to your immediate hour-to-hour day job. So I did a little bit of the two-handed economist answering that question, but so it goes.
Do you think, Nathan? If we train candidates and they get into office and they've already been trained, that would be an easier process?
I think in theory that makes sense. The problem is, and I don't want to besmirch any efforts that someone's making, but in my experience, someone who is willing to when they're launching a campaign, spending, or even like a little before, willing to spend 10, 15, 20 hours doing something like that, they likely need your platform more than you need their platform. And if that's true, that's kind of a bad sign in terms of their prospects. So I'm not saying it's impossible for someone who they could just be really committed and really devoted. But I do think sometimes I see, niche ideas, whether it's from our worlds or from other worlds, attached to people who declare themselves candidates because they're the ones listening to you, they're the ones speaking to you, but they're not necessarily really grounded in their community, or if they are really grounded in the community, they're not necessarily have the campaign infrastructure to really be launching a competitive campaign. And that doesn't mean that their candidacy is negative. It's always good to get their ideas out there. There were people running, in the Queen's election last year, and some of them only got 5-6% of the vote. I still think it was a positive thing for them to, get on the MMT way of thinking. But it's local politics is very complicated, and in terms of local campaigns, it's very complicated. And I think it's more likely that we're just going to kind of be slogging along, and there's going to be like a policy advisor who attaches late to a campaign who really knows that MMT is important and, really gives their candidate the down low on it. It's, that's the bind is, I think it's sort of a catch-22 of, to get someone who really internally believes and also is a viable competitive candidate within their district is such a best of both worlds thing that I think it's either going to take many years, someone who's like on a city council and takes a decade going from state senate or state house to being a competitive national candidate, or we're going to kind of have to settle for being the voice in the policy advisor's ear or the policy advisor in their ear, and not kind of MMT not being this kind of internalized thing in their brain.
Got it. Cheryl's here. Cheryl has a question. Hi.
Hi, Nathan. Thank you for talking to us tonight. I'm a little nervous. You are way over my head. I have a difficult time trying to follow you. I'm kind of new at progressive policy and all. But what I'm seeing is people are frustrated. We want to know what we can do with our own two hands. How can we take action? So my question is, I'm hearing about general strikes. In your estimation as an economist, how long would it be necessary for us to conduct a general strike? What are some of the things we need to consider, like for how long? And I'm hearing a trucker named Johnny Garza who's trying to promote truckers shutting down their work. So what would it take to make an impact and get the attention of the powers that be? Thank you.
Yeah, general strike is a common watchword for the left, especially since a lot of the general strikes in 1919. I would say in North America, people say general strike a lot nowadays. It gets invoked a lot in social media, but a general strike is a huge thing. The original concept, the IWW concept of a general strike is literally that you're taking control in each industry, and you're able to basically shut down like all the workplaces at once. And at the very least, you're able to shut down a city at once. And they really did shut down cities. They shut down, in 1919, they shut down Seattle. They shut down Winnipeg. They shut down places. It's a tremendous undertaking to really be able to shut down something. And so in terms of like the conventional idea of the general strike, I think we're many years away in terms of the state of the U.S. labor movement. Can specific things target specific industries shut down, and they can be really important and cause a real reaction? Absolutely. I think over a number of years, targeting Amazon distribution centers is going to be a huge thing. I think trucking, in terms of central hubs, can be, and I don't know of the person you're speaking of, how organized truckers are around that right now. A lot of truckers are independent contractors. It's not like the old days of really kind of being a very densely unionized industry where that could be a real, like a prospect that is, kind of ever present. I think, but on the other hand, friend of MMN, friend of a lot of MMT scholars, Sarah, I'm blanking. I'm suddenly, my mind is frozen. Sarah Nelson, sorry. Sarah Nelson, she literally ended the 2019 government shutdown by threatening to put airline workers on strike. Obviously, that is a less of a threat today with the state of the airline industry, but that's an example. You have a handle on a specific industry, you can make big things happen. So while I think general strike, in the conventional sense, we're far away from, targeting specific sectors that are really key, especially in this world of just-in-time production, you can significantly accomplish some things if you're really able to shut whatever that is down. But it's hard. It's really hard. I mean, all respect to labor organizers who day in and day out build for those kind of big moments.
And it's a lot of people that would be out of work for who knows how long, a few weeks. Or, it's a difficult task. Daniel has a question. Go ahead, you can unmute.
Hi, Ramona. Hi, Nathan.
Hello.
Hi. So my question's with regards to MMT-informed perspective on taxation. So Warren Mosler often says things like, we need to tackle inequality at the source, and he's talked about a payroll tax holiday in the past when he was trying to run for office, and I think he's had some views on corporate tax rates. What I'm trying to understand, from the MMT perspective, we understand the role of taxes, but that doesn't mean there's no shortage of new tax policies that are constantly being thrown at us. So what's an example of, what is an MMT-informed example of good types of taxation that move resources and free up resources to the proper spots for, again, like things like corporate tax, payroll tax, or, you have LVT or VAT taxes. There's no shortage of those. So what are ones that we go as MMT folks and say, this is a good policy and this can really work for us? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in the context of an economy that's already a monetary production economy, it's already a money economy. The income tax is still, one of the best, if not the best things out there, because, it does a couple things that MMT really likes, especially the more progressive variety, where the tax, where the highest tax bracket that applies to you, increases very gradually as your income gradually increases, until you get to very high incomes where the marginal tax rate is 70%, 80%, 90%, whatever it is. The property about that kind of gradually rising tax rate from an MMT perspective is that it does a very good job of draining more money out of the economy when people's incomes go up. So that you have this automatic response. People's income go up. Taxes, without changing any of the rates, pulls more money out of the economy. Right when you want it to. So that property is very positive. I think a tax that actually there's a UMKC dissertation that's all about. Is a square foot tax, tax based on the square foot of properties, and it applies both to individuals and to corporations. And one of the really nice properties of this tax is it has a sort of kind of base component, and then it has kind of its own marginal tax rate, where each additional square foot you own, you can potentially hit a higher tax bracket. And what's really nice is that in that proposal, in that dissertation, is that would apply to all the properties that they own. So if you have a property management company that owns 100 properties, then their 100,000 square foot is taxed at 90%, even 100%. So it's a tax. In that design, pushes very aggressively for deconcentrating the ownership of property and deconcentrating landlords. And more generally, controlling or limiting how much wealth you can accumulate in the form of physical property, in the form of real property, and that it also is a tax that encourages smaller houses. Our houses keep on getting, on average, keep on getting bigger in the United States, which means more energy use, more carbon use, and obviously, it's different. Me living in New York City with the apartment that I'm in, but often in a lot of places in the country, people would still live quite comfortably living in with the average house size that we had in 1970. So that's one proposal of tax out there. But more generally, I think, the idea is to kind of have taxes that respond to the state of the economy. And obviously you have certain behavioral taxes that you have negative behaviors that you might say are negative, that you want to apply, but more generally you want taxes that kind of very cleanly drain money out of the economy when spending starts to really spike up.
Kristen has a question. Hi.
Thanks, Nathan. And what's one thing each of us can do to help our elected representatives better understand MMT and act on that knowledge?
It's a very good question. I think I'll put this a different way. Answer kind of that question a little bit sideways. I think the best thing you can do in terms of your local representatives is at the first step talking with people locally to you. I think politicians, especially at a local level, they really respond to constituents, and they really only a very, very small percentage of constituents reach out to their congressperson, especially their city councilman, their state senator. How many people know who their state senator or their state representative is? That is, that's a very small percentage of people. And then, you reaching out can do something, but on the other hand, if something sounds weird to them, that's just one person. If you have a little block, even 12 people, even 20 people, getting up to 50, that, if 50 people all write in about something, that can really have an impact on your local politicians and get them to, stand to attention, and also devote you more time. So I think, the first level step is just, obviously this is very difficult in COVID right now, but on the other hand, as people get vaccinated and as people get comfortable socializing again, people are going to be really up for socializing and talking about anything, and also talking about solving problems. So this kind of thing doesn't happen again. At least the incompetent government response. I think preparing for interacting with people locally to talk and thinking about how to talk things locally, you can then sort of take it to the local politician stage after that.
I like that idea. So my representative is Mikey Sherrill, and I've written to her, and she's never written me back. So Patrick has a question. Is Patrick with us? Hi, Patrick.
Hey, sorry, it took a little bit to unmute me. Hi again, Nathan. So my question, this question is a little gossipy, but I'm kind of asking this because it's our last evening. And my question is that I noticed on Twitter recently is there's some disagreement between Warren and Rohan in particular. They seem to be, having some, it wasn't like super heated, but a little heated, about the job guarantee. And I guess what I'm wondering is, as all we've been learning about MMT, which has been fantastic, could you kind of explain a little bit, like, what do you see as being, are there some disagreements in the MMT world that you see that maybe you could kind of, tell us about, not necessarily in a gossipy way, but just like, what are issues that you see that are maybe not even totally figured out yet with MMT people?
Yeah, so I'll try to talk about this, but also without, as you say, not getting into the gossipy element of this. I would say that, it's easy to, we're at a certain stage with MMT and with where we are at right now. But if you think about how lonely it must have been in the 1990s talking about any of this stuff, and there's online that people, the original people who were around in the 90s originate that they used to count on their hands how many people they thought really got MMT, and they were excited when they got to use their second hand. And in the context of that, I think where we are now, people who are still promoting MMT, still pushing it to this day, that takes a real force of personality. And we owe the people who had that force of personality a lot in terms of getting here. But the flip side of having a real force of personality and feeling like you built something, is it's easy to feel like all the issues are settled and that you figured everything out. And the kind of fresh perspective that I think a kind of younger generation of MMT people are bringing, MMT scholars who are trying to explore all the different implications MMT has over a wide, scope of scholarly fields and history and so on, that will naturally have some conflict between people who think that they figured everything out. And I would understand feeling like you figured everything out when you were saying it when there were 6 people, and now tens of thousands think it, and millions know your point of view when it gets invoked by people on all sides constantly. It makes total sense to feel like, I figured everything out, and I have the answer here. And who are these upstarts? Even if people, we started showing up a decade ago, well, what's a decade when we started in 1993 or 1995? I think in that context, I think there's naturally going to be some conflict, and I do think that probably there's some figures among the old guard in the MMT world more than others who figured out like they had capital T the answer, and feel like not just they have the answer, but they have the right framing, because they had some degree of success. Of course, they think why are we fixing something that isn't broke? And I think naturally, some of the people who devote a lot of effort to building out MMT and also having conversations about MMT in different spaces and different audiences and new contexts, have a different perspective on what the implications of MMT are, and pushed and developed in different directions. So I think, that's really ultimately the source of the conflict. And, of course, when we work on something for 6 months with a congressperson, which I think is really big deal and really important, and something gets publicly criticized in a way that we might feel is superficial, before someone who we have a relationship with, we've talked a lot to, doesn't reach out to us beforehand to have that conversation privately, it's easy to be defensive of the work that you've spent a lot of time on the flip side of that, and also to feel like you've had your own success. I wouldn't credit any specific individual of like really being the ones who've been pushing MMT forward, but I don't think it would be arrogant to say that the Modern Money Network has been a significant part of pushing MMT forward, especially in the political sphere, and especially among journalists, among congressional staffers, among union locals, and so on, among left-wing organizations, and we have a view of what works as well. And there's always going to be that sort of, I think, generational conflict, and hopefully more listening. I'll just end by saying hopefully more listening happens in the future rather than just sort of constantly being at odds. But I also think it's kind of natural in terms of where MMT is at right now.
And isn't this how it's supposed to be? I mean, how many people took Darwin's work and developed from there? How many people took Marx's work and developed it from there? You don't stop with one person and one position.
Yes, there's always an evolution of thought. Dan has a question. Welcome, Dan.
Hi. Happy to have you here, Nathan. It's good to hear you. It feels like the federal jobs guarantee is often kind of the promised land, if you will, for MMT. And I fear the same end that happened with the Supreme Court with the New Deal. What do you see, or how do you see us avoiding that fate?
Yeah, good question. I mean, ultimately, nothing I can say here is gonna tell you that 5 Republican Supreme Court justices can't come up with some justification for killing a bill. On the other hand, I would say that there's been a lot of work in terms of making bills as watertight as possible and as difficult as possible to water down by the courts. And that doesn't make it impossible, of course, but it does mean that activity would have to be more capricious and more just sort of making something up and have less of a fig leaf than if we had holes in the bill, if we didn't have standardized forms of relief that kind of avoids really rancorous, complicated court procedures. I think my ultimate answer is a United States that successfully passes a job guarantee and a president signs into a law is not a United States where the Supreme Court would really dare to screw with it. Ultimately, because that's a radically different United States than the United States that we have today. Either they've previously already packed the court or reorganized the court and, shrunk the court's relative power in the United States, or that is the fight to have a sort of FDR style fight over court packing. You bring up the New Deal, they swung their hammer at the New Deal, and FDR eventually said, we're gonna wreck you, and that legislation ultimately didn't pass, but the threat was successful enough in getting Supreme Court justices to back off of the New Deal and to end the lockdown era in the United States. That era of kind of very, very right-wing court actions, and I think ultimately that's what would happen today if we really got to the point of successfully passing a job guarantee.
So what do right-wingers want if they don't want social policy, federal jobs guarantee? What do they want? How do they see it?
You either be a deserving, upstanding taxpayer and, make it your own way, or you die. I mean, I think that's ultimately to it. People often don't put it in those crude terms, but that Texas politician who said, you freeloaders don't want to pay your $15,000 utilities bill. The strong survive. That's how it's supposed to work. Obviously was tone deaf and kind of very over the top. But I think that ultimately is the answer. I mean, more people died, more people went to prison after welfare reform in the 90s, and more, it's not like anyone talks about that or bemoans that death. We force them to take personal responsibility. I think that's the social policy is more people die from not having their needs met, not being able to, access the resources that they need, including remunerative work.
How do they think that benefits society?
Because it encourages you not to be a freeloader. It encourages you to be an upstanding citizen. I think a lot of people would say it's the lesser evil to your world where everything's a free handout. The threat to the individual, the threat to the human person, the threat to the person's desire to be self-reliant is much bigger than the threat to their livelihood or their, it's worth the higher death rate. It's because Americans will be Americans.
I see. So Christina had a question. She's asking, what do you think the Eunice idea where money can generate local employment and jobs, would this need be necessary and be tied to federal government? Can states mandate federal job guarantee on their own?
So for people that don't know, the UNI's proposal is a proposal I wrote about early in my publication notes on the crises that the humanities division of MMN, people like Scott Ferguson and such really ran with. The idea of universities issuing their own currencies that were, that they would accept back in payments to them as these sort of, big infrastructures in U.S. life to support themselves, maintain themselves. Given the fiscal pressures that they were under because of coronavirus-related cuts. I'm still supportive of that proposal in terms of, trying to reverse a little bit of austerity in universities. I don't think that on its own can do the work of implementing a job guarantee. I think the question of job guarantees and local currencies is kind of, I think larger, kind of more complicated conversation. There's a lot of questions of design and how you're going to back such a currency to make it really function. But I'll say, it's certainly a possibility and definitely something to be considered in places that have a really, really high level of unemployment and, don't have any other resources to respond it with. I think you should consider everything, but I don't think it's a replacement for the federal legally enforceable right to a job.
May I just say that we have some very interesting information about the unis. We did a macro and cheese with Scott Ferguson and Ben Wilson, where they explained it, and we also had a national outreach call with them. So again, that's on realprogressives.org. We have two more questions, Nathan. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and I also want to tell people that they should subscribe to Nathan's blog. It's nathantankus.substack.com. I didn't understand it when I first subscribed, but by reading it with every post, I'm getting a little better. And you can find lots of MMT information at modernmoneynetwork.org, at realprogressives.org, at what's that other one? Oh, wecanhavethings.com. So there's lots of good information out there. please don't hesitate to reach out.
Raul has another question. Go ahead.
Good evening again, folks. Again, more related to maybe the mechanics of a federal job guarantee in terms of jurisdiction. My question is a direct federal to local pipeline bypassing state governments the best way to manage a federal job guarantee program? Thank you.
It's a very good question. I think it's that's something that's hotly debated among job guarantee advocates. I think there's pros and minuses. Very commonly brought up point by economists Derek Hamilton and Sandy Darity is worrying about racial discrimination at the state and local level and their administration of participation in the program. You know, obviously the federal government has a complicated relationship to structural racism, but often these kind of programs that kind of come from the more libertarian end, when they're pushed through, tend to function better or tends to do better on issues of race when they're administered at the federal level than versus the state and local level. I tend to kind of think that we need a lot of different streams. We need a federal job stream. We need a state and local job stream. We need a nonprofit job stream. We need like a democratic cooperative job stream. We need a lot of different streams. Project approval process for projects that are proposed, that are community projects that are proposed. That is distinct from state and local government, but also necessarily not just like federal administrators administering it. My thinking is sort of, or the thinking of a lot of people in MMN is, the more different avenues in which you can access a job guarantee job, the less likely it is that you'll be blocked from one avenue. So that something happens at the state and local level, then you can propose a project. If something happens at that level, you can get it at the federal level. Or more generally, you can pick the level that you think is least likely that you're going to get screwed with or have trouble accessing the job guarantee program as you should, and sort of kind of have these redundancies so that people aren't just capriciously denied access to the program. And I think there's a lot of historical examples of direct job creation where you want to have these kind of different avenues, because you just have one set of administrators at a province that being the ones who are doling out the job guarantee jobs can give them some influence and power that might be undesirable. So, but yeah, as I said, it's a good question and it's hotly debated. And we'll see what the final form will be in Presley's legislation, where obviously her office is balancing a lot of different considerations and potential complaints from many different constituencies.
Cole has the final question. Cole wants to know, what are the safeguards on a federal job guarantee to keep corrupt officials from exploiting the influx of money?
I mean, I think I just was just saying it. I think we need a lot of oversight. I think you need a lot of auditing, but I think ultimately also you need a lot of different streams so that people have the ability to say something is going wrong with one stream, report it, and access their guaranteed job in another stream. Obviously, no program is going to be perfect. I think but at the design level, at the legislative level, these are the kind of things that we've been thinking in terms of, in order to create as many redundancies as possible, so that people can access the job guarantee as needed.
This is fantastic. Thank you, Nathan. You can find more of these recordings at realprogressives.org. There's one for each chapter. Go to the media menu and look for the RP Book Club. While you're there, be sure to check out the Macro and Cheese podcast and a wide range of other materials on MMT and other progressive issues. Thanks for joining us.